as I was preparing this talk today, I searched for some charts or images that I could use to show you how fast things have been moving in the past and how fast they'll continue to move in the future. And I bumped into this one in a presentation from SoftBank, projecting 30 years into the future, predicting that only 0.02% of current companies will survive. Now, this felt quite hyperbolic to me at first, but then I thought, if there really is a great filter ahead of us, then maybe this is more likely than I think. Companies of today that deal with external change by going through large and extremely risky transformational projects might not make it through such a filter, because the pace of change is accelerating. The cost of transformation might soon start to outweigh the benefits, and then we'll all be left in the dust. So we need a new model. We need to adapt. We need to change the way that we think about change. We need to internalize it. We need to own it. We need to embrace change. Now, this may be scary for many companies. I mean, we're biased towards the status quo, business as usual. But for those that forge forward, there are two key competencies that will lead the way. The first is the ability to elicit change within your organization, so simply the competency of transformation. The second is the ability to leverage innovation within your organization. And here I'm not referring to innovation towards products or services or markets, but rather internal innovation towards organizational structure, communication, and culture. And I'm not referring to global innovation as in this is the first time anyone has ever done something like this, but rather local innovation. This is the first time we've done this. The ultimate realization of a path like this is what some people call an evolutionary organization, one which is able to weather anything thrown at it. So how do we get from here to there? Well, first let's pull back from this fuzzy ideal of an evolutionary organization and remind ourselves we're simply talking about business. So our chief concern is business viability, especially if we're focusing 30 years ahead. And as such, business results, productivity, products, services, efficiency are all going to be our constant focus. And of course, staying a relevant workplace, making sure that we retain our top talent and continue to attract new top talent. And so everything I'll be talking about today will pay directly into these basic business goals, but will also take us a couple of steps towards this ideal of an evolutionary organization and help us deal with this accelerated pace of change and this potential torrent of transformations which might be coming our way. So today, most companies are in the middle of their own form of a digital transformation. And I'm not going to go into detail about this other than to say that digital transformation tends to promise that it will enhance customer experience, accelerate growth, drive innovation, improve operational efficiency, increase agility, and a whole lot more, many, many excellent things. Now, in my experience, dealing with companies in this, going through their own digital transformation, they tend to be quite heavy on the digital and quite light on the transformation, leading to often a form of a technology makeover rather than an actual transformation. And this manifests itself in a deep focus on tools and data and information, and watching this flow across the organization, across boundaries, and maybe even getting to a state where you have a feeling of things flowing from ideation to actually delivery, and calling this then a value stream, which it really kind of isn't. We forget to focus on the deeper layers, not enough focus on process, and certainly not enough focus on our own employees, because there's this hyper-focus, even obsession with our customer, with our end user. And this is great, it delivers a lot of value, but there's very little focus internally towards our own employees. We tend to get the short end of the stick within digital transformations. And you see this also in manifestos online, that people, companies describe how they're going through their own digital transformation. It reads as a laundry list of really excellent things connected to technology and customers and delivery, and then there are a handful of notes at the bottom about employee experience empowerment that often read just as footnotes. Additionally, every company I know has a deep-seated reluctance to making any sort of significant organizational change. And so here's what it might look like in a kind of simplified diagram form. So a CEO will be driving her digital transformation initiative down into her organization and might start working with development, DevOps, products. These departments are generally the places where you have the most bottlenecks anyway, even in a healthy organization. And so they start working together, and they get really motivated because they see that this is a better way of working, and they start to break down barriers and collaborate cross-functionally. And all sorts of other adjacent issues start to pop up. Issues like self-management, empowerment, diversity, progressive management, things like this. And these issues inevitably gain their own champions. And these champions then start to bring these issues up towards executive management. And that's the CEO there assessing the situation. And in the best case, what happens is something like this. The CEO says, that's great. These are really important topics, and we should make sure that they get the attention they deserve. But let's stick with your departments for now. I'm not sure the rest of the company can really handle this stuff. And in the worst case, and I've seen this happen, the CEO simply stomps on these issues and just says, no, this is not the right time. We need to sharpen our focus back to our core digital transformation. And what we need instead is an enlightened CEO who understands that the importance of these topics, but who also realizes that they're fragile, that they share the same property of being susceptible to starvation and to being accidentally compartmentalized within organizations. And so someone who will elevate these issues up, give them the space that they need, and ideally even deal with them as if they were their own transformations, using the same methods and installing a voice at the table at the top. And so a key player here is the CEO. And so if your CEO is not on board with these topics, then these conversations are ultimately not going to be very fruitful. The Germans have a great proverb, der Fisch stinkt vom Kopf her, which roughly translates to a fish rots from the head down. So the way that a CEO will respond to a situation like these issues being brought up will send an extraordinarily strong message to the future culture of your company. Now, when I'm presented with a situation where a company I'm consulting with is going through a digital transformation, but it's not really a digital transformation, I have a couple of ways that I can approach this. One is to go head on and say, wait, so this is not correct. Like there are a bunch of things you're not doing, and some of the things you're doing are not going to deliver what you think they'll deliver. And I find this approach to be not very helpful. It tends to set us up as opponents rather than partners. And at some point, someone might say, wait, do we really need to be doing this by the book? At that point, I've kind of been painted as the deliverer of dogma, and things start to kind of unwind from there. Trust recedes and motivation falls. And so I prefer to think of this more as a teacher-student approach, where my role is not to be correct, but to adapt to my student. And anyway, every transformation, every company is going to be different. And so we need to adapt in any case anyway. And the actual core concept of what is a perfect digital transformation technically doesn't really exist. There are thousands of definitions and is anyway not that important. The focus needs to be on the results. And so there are a lot of these issues and topics that tend to starve within organizations or get compartmentalized, which I'd like to pull out into their own transformations to give them enough space to breathe. The first I'll talk about today is an organizational transformation. So I won't be discussing how to reorg or which department you need and which you don't, but rather about some of the more interesting conversations that start to happen once you start to make significant organizational change. So when you start to build true value streams across your organization, really break down barriers between old silos, and people start to collaborate across functional lines, you start to see motivation grow, and you start to see people wanting to make decisions on their own. And so your old decision-making model of centralized decision-making and having it float up and down simply will keep you back, hold you back. And so you need to take that decision-making model and push it down and out, thereby laying the groundwork for a true distributed decision-making model. And what this needs to work is a couple things. Of course, you need to be able to disseminate the way you want decisions to be made and teach people. But more importantly, you need to empower your employees. And so you need to tell them that not only are they allowed to make decisions, take on responsibility and authority, but they're expected to. And empowerment is not something that you can lecture into people. This is something you need to show by example. So think about a situation where a CEO has set up a distributed decision-making model, tells his employees that they're all now empowered and expected to make local decisions, like in the node closest to the action. And then someone makes the decision, which causes the company a great deal of money. What do you do? How do you respond? Do you come down crashing on the employee, berate them publicly, and maybe even fire them? Do you frantically try to restructure your organization so that this particular failure can never happen again in the future? If you do so, you destroy empowerment, and you completely remove all foundation for any sort of distributed decision-making model in the future. None of your employees will ever dare make a decision again. So instead, we need to rethink the way we deal with failures and move towards robustness as an organization. So instead of trying to predict and avoid failure, we need to reduce the business impact when failures inevitably happen. So at the same time these conversations are happening, another interesting one always starts to happen. What is the role of a manager? So when people start to take on more responsibility, the manager starts to think, so what do I do now? Now I'm no longer telling them what to do. And one of the problems with this conversation is that it almost always happens organically, and it is almost never kind of grabbed and given the space to grow. It usually gets pushed to the side for more urgent issues. And so I'd like to pull this out into its own transformation and give it a space to grow. And so when managers reach this point in logic, they say, so I'm no longer a manager of people in the sense of telling them what to do. Maybe I'm a manager of environments, of helping make sure that they have the environment to become the best that they can be. And anyway, these people are adults. I mean, do I need to be holding their hand all the time? And they're even more experts than I am in their domain. I mean, who am I to be telling them how to solve their problems? And so managers that reach this point in their logic, which is quite sound, I find, they take a huge step back. And then this happens. So management by abdication is a huge problem. It's a manifestation of a block of information flow between a manager and her employees. So the manager says, with all good intentions, I totally trust you guys. You're experts, and you've been delivering great in the past years. I don't need to know what's going on. And again, good intentions behind this. And so time goes by, and eventually the manager needs to know what's going on. And what commonly happens at this point is this. The manager flies in, makes a lot of noise because they don't like what they see, dumps on everything, and then flies back out, which is, of course, extremely toxic. And so what we need, instead of such as like a simple model of, now I'm progressive, so I'm just going to pull back, we need a more complex way of kind of pulling back. And so so what we need here is actually, there is no template for it because it's going to be contextual. It's going to depend on the people involved, the teams, the project, the manager themselves. And so what we really need here is actually time for these conversations to happen, and a venue for them to happen, a forum. We need to build up mastery. We need to build up maturity, and we need to build up wisdom within this field of management. And which basically means that we need to start realizing that management itself is a profession. It's not the extension of all other professions in your organization. It's a profession on its own. And managers generally have much more in common with other managers than they do with the domain from which they came. Management also has a serious prestige problem, generally tied to higher salary, more influence, more seniority. And a special case of this problem is when you have practitioners, developers or designers, that want to continue to grow in their careers, and they hit a ceiling where at some point they say, now you're a senior manager, if you want a raise, you have to take on a team. You're forced into a new profession. And so what we need to do to solve this situation is to actually break things apart. We need to create separate career ladders, one for management, one for practitioners, thereby allowing practitioners to continue to grow instead of being forced into management, which the net result is that a lot of people in management didn't really want to be there originally. They don't have a burning desire to manage. And so if we take the practitioner career ladder and extend it all the way up to the level of equivalent of a senior VP, then people can continue to do what they love and still continue to grow within their organization. And you take the management track and extend it downwards to include a junior manager and a trainee manager, which then supports the idea of management as a profession, because very, very, very few people jump into a management position, a middle management position, and simply just know how to manage. We need to deal with this as a real profession. And once you break this apart, you create a sense of parity within an organization. You encourage conversations around being peers and respect, especially if you take the final step of actually equalizing salary across these tracks, so that when you reach the top level SVP equivalent as a developer, you have the same salary as an SVP in your organization. And so this conversation and others, like going through self-management and dealing with flattening hierarchies, opens up some space for the general concept of respect within the workplace to happen. And once this conversation has space to grow, it really starts to open up a whole bunch of other conversations about employee experience, about workplace experience, some of which I'd like to pull into their own transformation, which I'll call workplace transformation. Now, the first topic here is work-life balance, which is the trend now is sort of toward work-life integration. Now, the word integration often conjures up images of managers abusing their employees by calling them on weekends or expecting them to be always online. And that's not what I mean. What we need here is actually a two-way integration where work also adapts itself to life. And we see a lot of initiatives going in this direction. But if you think about it, when an employee is able to deal with the complexities of their life without having to worry about work, this same employee will be able to deal with the complexities of work without worrying about life. So people reward trust with trust. Inclusion and diversity are two enormously important topics. This is not just about hitting numbers. This is about the realization that in addition to this having an enormous positive social impact, this also has a huge impact on your innovation potential as an organization. The more diverse and inclusive you are, the easier it is to spark innovation. Now, these topics also need to be raised up into a transformational state. It's not enough to simply install programs. You need to fundamentally change your culture and your behavior to enable inclusion and diversity. And in case you confuse the topics, noted diversity advocate Renee Myers puts it quite nicely. She says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And finally, safety is an absolute prerequisite to pretty much everything we've been talking about today. Safety from predatory behavior, safety from bullying, safety from retaliation, safety from sexual harassment and any other types of harassment. If your workplace is not safe, your people will not innovate. So what I've shown today with these topics, and of course there are many more, is that they kind of flow together into each other, support each other, but they all share the same property of being easily starved and accidentally compartmentalized within organizations. And so we pull them out into their own transformation, give them more weight. And all of these topics pay, I think, pretty obviously directly into basic business results. But they also take us a couple steps forward towards reaching this evolutionary organizational ideal and being ready for the future. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned two key competencies that will kind of lead the way. One, which we've spent the last 20 minutes or so discussing, was the ability to leverage innovation internally in your organization. The other was the ability to elicit change, or the competency of transformation. And so transformation today as a concept has really crossed the chasm, gone from projects the size of hundreds of thousands of euro up to hundreds of millions of euro. And what we also know is that such incredibly large transformational projects are extremely risky. Add to that the effect, think about the last time you finished a very, very large project in your organization. What was the immediate sort of emotional response to that? Relax, status quo, business as usual. We've overcome this huge hurdle that we want to come back to business as usual because that's where we want to be. And someone comes along and says, now we need to continue. We need to look at the next big transformation. And the response is going to be still wait. Let's relax a little bit. Let's make sure that we know exactly what we're doing. We still need to see the effects of our last change. And what happens then is that these large batches of work that are ahead, these transformations, they start to accumulate more and more work as we leave them there and as we wait. And we know this quite well from software development, software engineering, is that the longer we wait with things, the larger the batch sizes get. And if you pair this with the accelerated pace of change, then the size of the batches will also accelerate. And within software development, basically the only way to deal with increasing batch sizes is to attack this at the root cause, which is to decrease the batch size, to reduce it. And so we need to do this as well here with transformations. We need to jump on these things right away, start to slice them down into smaller transformations, and then slice those down into even smaller, and continue until we have a huge set of small transformational bits. And this gives us the prerequisites to being able to get into a state which is called flow, where you can just kind of just see things flow constantly and continuously through your organization. Now, some more prerequisites that we need to being able to actually get into a flow state is the core competency of being able to transform actually needs to be spread across the organization. It needs to be democratized. If we leave it within the hands of one team or one person, then no matter how small bits get, things are not going to get faster. They might even get slower. And we need to practice. We need to actually start doing things. We need to start breaking transformations down and start picking little bits that we can start working on and get moving with. And if we're actually going to leverage our employees to help with this, we need to actually empower them to actually make transformational decisions. Exactly the same way as we empower people to make product decisions or IT decisions in a local node, we need our employees to be able to make decisions about transformation in the node closest to the action. And so here's a different way of viewing what I've been talking about in a simple diagram mode. So we're assuming here we're in the kind of old model of dealing with each transformation as an obstacle in our path, and we have an accelerated pace of change looming ahead. And here we have a digital transformation, bottom left, and then comes the business as usual part where we wait a little bit, and the next transformation comes up and it's bigger. And as we zoom forward in time, the next break in between is smaller, the next transformation is even bigger, until eventually at some point, whether it's 3 or 10 transformations from now, it's so big that our business viability might be under risk. And so we have a risk of ruin. So if we abstract a little bit here, if we're working in the old model and we assume an accelerated pace of change, we have a high likelihood for reaching a ruinous state. And so we need a new model that might help us get through this filter to the 0.02%. And this model can look something like this. Digital transformation on the bottom left going on, and as soon as it's done, we go directly into next transformations in plural, which might be the three that I discussed today. And we not only try to deliver these transformations successfully, we also focus on the competency of transforming, and we make sure that any following transformations will be easier, less costly, take less time, be smaller. And so there they start to get smaller and smaller until eventually, at some point, we reach a flow state, a state of continuous transformation, which might help us get through this filter towards the 0.02%. Some fundamental prerequisites for this even being possible are, as we discussed, unlocking innovation and motivation throughout your whole organization with every individual, empowering everyone to be able to make transformational decisions locally, and rethinking the way we deal with failure as an organization, moving towards robustness rather than prevention. And everything we've been discussing today will be leading us in this direction. So finishing your digital transformation, going through these additional transformational steps, whether you see them as these three or whether you see them as part of your digital transformation, it doesn't really matter that much. There are going to be more anyway that will come in the future. These will all help us give us the tools that we need to move into this new model. But it's not going to be very fruitful unless your CEO is on board. So this is what the model can look like from a bird's eye view: digital transformation, bottom left, moving to the right, and then kind of flowing up. So you might be in the camp where you say, this is not going to happen. There's not going to be any torrent of transformations, and we don't need to change our model. Our model is just fine. We just need to keep practicing it. That's fine. Then my message to you is to focus on all of the discussions today on internal innovation. Because we have an incredible amount of frozen innovation within our organizations. And those companies that are able to completely unlock these will start their own little internal renaissance. They will fly forward on a wave of success and leave the rest of us behind. And for those of you that even don't believe that, that's also fine. I have a pretty simple message for you. Your competition will, and they will implement this stuff. So you guys need to keep up. So that's all I have. I'll be here around today. If you have any questions or want to approach me, please do. I'm happy to have a conversation, or approach me through social media or my email. Thank you very much.